I asked you to consider why this book's outrageousness has prevailed when other outrages have waned. I thought about the outrages I've known. I remember one boy being sent out my year 2 classroom for making a joke, in which the Liverpool fan was the liver, the Hearts fan was the heart, and the Arsenal fan was the arse. I remember in year 4 being told to listen to London Underground because it's the rudest song in the world. I've got some lyrics here for you. So I'm standing here in the pouring rain. Where the fuck's my fucking train? London Underground, London Underground. They're all lazy, fucking useless cunts. London Underground, London Underground. They're all greedy cunts. I want to shoot them all with a rifle. Then I remember subsequently 2 Girls, 1 Cup, terrorism jokes, and on. These all waned. They were shocking at first, but quickly became uninteresting. Yet Portnoy's complaint still shocks us. It's outrageous in a different way. So in what way is it outrageous? Let's remember that today's reader has seen things that are much more obscene, more impolite, and certainly more pornographic. It's not outrageous for being any of those things. It's outrageous, and I'm sure you saw this coming, because it is honest. It is outrageously honest. I was dissatisfied with my explanation of this in the last book, but I said that honesty rings out above everything else, that the only undoubtedly true things we can say are, I've had this thought, I've had this feeling, and I've seen this thing, and that we hear these truths among everything else, the way a mother hears her baby scream among those of 100 others. The ring of honesty is unmistakable. Portnoy's complaint rings out to us among so many outrages, and so many books, and is so intense and so irresistible, ultimately, for its honesty. In Infinite Jest, David Foster Wallace has the following about sharing at an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. The thing is, it has to be the truth to really go over here. It can't be a calculated crowd pleaser, and it has to be the truth unslanted, unfortified, and maximally unironic. An ironist in a Boston AA meeting is a witch in church. Irony-free zone. Same with sly, disingenuous, manipulative, pseudo-sincerity. Sincerity with an ulterior motive is something these tough, ravaged people know and fear, all of them trained to remember the coyly sincere, ironic, self-presenting fortifications they'd had to construct to carry on out there, under the ceaseless neon bottle. Maybe we're not all addicts, but we are like that, and you could do worse than go to an NA or AA meeting yourself and observe how palpably distinct the difference between honesty and dishonesty is. Just obviously make sure if you're not an addict that you go to one that's explicitly open, obviously. Wallace later has Gately's most marked progress in turning his life around in sobriety, besides the fact that he no longer drives off into the night with other people's merchandise, is that he tries to be just about as verbally honest as possible at almost all times now, without too much calculation about how a listener's going to feel about what he says. This is harder than it sounds. This is harder than it sounds, finally, Wallace has said elsewhere. Fiction's about what it is to be a fucking human being. Welcome back to In the Particular. I hope you had a nice Christmas. I hope you're well. I hope your family's well. Let's talk about wanking. Sorry if I sound tired, by the way. I was up all night reading Dostoevsky. Yeah. As I frequently am. And sorry we're back in the car. I did try to use a better camera, but it turns out 8 gigabytes is way less than I thought it was, and that my spare memory card is still filled with photos from the brief but inevitable phase when I thought I was destined to be a streetwear photographer and spent my days standing quite far away from the skateboarders at the South Bank taking pictures of them. But anyway, one of my best friends, one of the people I look up to most, has this great habit of being bluntly open about embarrassing things. Once everyone was talking about somehow wiping your ass, and he just went, I always get skids. It was hilarious, but for one, but also secretly kind of a relief. I think there are probably better examples, but this one's quite funny. And you could tell it was a relief by the way that our less open friends would, at later dates, bring up the same conversation and kind of edge it towards the same topic, and point at him a bit, hoping he'd reaffirm what he'd said before, which he always did with, yeah, I always get skids. And the person he'd brought up would laugh, but laugh with marked freedom and happiness. It's still routine in our group conversations for people to tacitly ask for the relief of my one friend's openness. We are all more at peace for being his friend. Now, my friend is good at honesty, but Roth is a master. While Roth does also mention skid marks, I always discover in the bottommost seam a pale and wispy brushstroke of my shit. Oh, doctor, I wipe and I wipe and I wipe. I spend as much time wiping as I do crapping. Maybe even more. I use toilet paper like it grew on trees, so says my envious father. He mentions much more than that, though. And the more difficult, shameful, guilty the subject, the greater the relief we feel, and Roth takes on the most difficult subjects available. He himself describes how he imagines the most humiliating, exposing headlines that could possibly be published about him. I asked you to do a similar thing with writing a list of things you don't say aloud in the pre-read, but I burned my list, and I imagine you did something. You at least kept it to yourself. Roth gives us everything. His very first sentence leaps straight into perhaps the most difficult subject of all. She was so deeply embedded in my consciousness that for the first year of school I seemed to have believed that each of my teachers was my mother in disguise. Yeah. Parents, the classic and the central source of repression. Here, Roth is relentlessly rigorous. We escalate all the way to descriptions of his memories, of his father's penis and his mum's period blood. No one wants to talk about these things, but everyone has these memories preserved in unnervingly pristine condition. I hope they do, anyway, and it's not just me making myself sound deranged and humiliating myself, but I suppose the point is that, it's actually kind of the point that even if it is just me, it's me and Portnoy. I think actually that is what I've written. In unnervingly pristine condition, and can draw some relief from seeing that at least Portnoy, if no one else, is the same. Throughout the entire book, Roth gives us a bonanza of guilt and shame. So much so that by the time we get to erectile dysfunction, we hardly even blink. And that's erectile dysfunction. That destroys people. That ruins men's and boys' lives. But we're unfazed. Think about what that says about how Roth has comforted us. Though it's what's talked about most, this book contends with far more than just Freudian psychosexual repression. The passages in which Portnoy recognizes his father's weakness are just as brave. He has, "Okay, big shot ball player," he says, and grasps my new regulation bat somewhere near the middle, and to my astonishment with his left hand where his right hand should be, I am suddenly overcome with such sadness I want to tell him, "Hey, your hands are wrong," but I'm unable to for fear I might begin to cry. Or he might. "Come on, big shot, throw the ball," he calls, and so I do. And of course discover that on top of all the other things I am just beginning to suspect about my father, he isn't King Kong Charlie Keller either. Later we have... in that ferocious and self-annihilating way in which so many Jewish men of his generation served their families, my father served my mother, my sister Hannah, but particularly me. Where he had been imprisoned, I would fly. That was his dream. Mine was its corollary. In my liberation would be his, from ignorance, from exploitation, from anonymity. To this day, our destinies remain scrambled together in my imagination. There are still too many times when upon reading some book in a passage that impresses me with its logic, or its wisdom, instantly, involuntarily I think, if only he could read this. I clean forget my own cancer and the grief that comes now as it came then. When I think how much of life has always been, as he himself very accurately puts it, beyond his comprehension and his grasp. No money, no schooling, no language, no learning. Curiosity without culture, drive without opportunity, experience without wisdom. How easily his inadequacies can move me to tears. Each of us who has a dad must at one point recognize that he is vulnerable. We're all on a seesaw with our parents that starts with them high and us low, them looking after us and providing everything and knowing everything. But with time, they sink and we rise. And the day that you're level and you find yourself looking your parents directly in the eye can sneak up on you and can be unthinkably destabilizing. I remember one night, particularly at the dinner table, I looked at him and just couldn't avoid that he was ridiculous and naive and vulnerable. When he eventually stopped talking, I cleared the dinner and went up to my room and just burst into tears. I was so shaken. This is very hard, very unavoidable, and very painful. It's also very difficult to talk about. Roth, in simply saying, "I think it's painful too," is a great friend to us. It's a great relief to be assured that we are not alone in our suffering. Just feeling seen, if only by one person, makes pain so much more bearable. I think of it like someone is standing at the top of a mountain range looking at all the daunting journey he has to make, and like that guy with red hair and a black coat in the painting, feeling anxious, and what he really needs most is someone else to appear, stand beside him, look out across the mountains also and say, yeah, that's not easy. My mum has often said, "Stop solving my problems, just listen." She's always said that. But as is only right, I never listened to her and only took note of it when I was told the same thing by Russian short story and playwright Anton Chekhov. He said, "Art doesn't have to solve problems, it only has to formulate them correctly. Not a single problem is resolved in Anna Karenina, and yet the novel satisfies you completely because the problems it raises are formulated correctly." Roth relentlessly formulates every problem he faces. He allows himself no self-pity. We sense where he would have cringed or winced and wanted to turn back, but he always persists. Each time he mounts himself once more onto the speculum and takes a deep breath, he adheres to the words of fellow New Jersey native Bruce Springsteen. "Well, we made a promise we swore we'd always remember. No retreat, baby, no surrender. Like soldiers in the winter's night, with a vow to defend. No retreat, baby, no surrender." Roth promises honesty and delivers it. He never retreats and he never surrenders. He suffers greatly to speak honestly, so that we might feel less alone. He does not tell us this is how to fix this, and he couldn't, but he does tell us, yeah, it is hard. I think it's hard too. And he tells us this for everything he finds hard. He was ruthless with himself, that we might be gentler with ourselves. This means a lot. This book, by its honesty, its courage, and its technical brilliance, can guide us through hazardous territory and deliver us safely to reconciliation and maybe to peace. It is a work of the utmost discipline, the utmost skill, and the utmost generosity. I treasure it, and I am very grateful to Roth for making it. It's funny to think that such a irascible, indignant, biting voice could comfort us, but it can. We know the book is set in a therapist's office, but we might wonder who's really receiving the therapy. It's a good line, isn't it?